Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Colleen Stovall, and welcome to today's discussion with the Small Business Exchange. We'll start our program shortly. I just have a few slides, and then I'm going to introduce the president of AIA Miami, Robert Grabowski. Please remember to keep your videos off and yourselves muted, because this will help us with the quality of the video. Thank you.
And Colleen, I understand our Urban Warrior is the in-person already sold out. Now it's just the virtual tickets.
Yeah, we have virtual VIPs tickets available, and we have the regular virtual tickets available. Our center can only hold so many, and I think people are so anxious to get together that those sold out within about a week.
Right.
Okay, first up, I would like to introduce Robert Grabowski, the president of AIA Miami for this year. Robert.
No, thank you, Colleen, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the program. As Colleen was showing you there, I mean, there's a lot going on at the center, either virtually or in person. So please go to aiamiami.org and check out the calendar for us and MCAD. So we're just really happy that you're here today. Colleen, will there be a survey at the end of this?
Yes, there will. We'll have, thank you. Thanks for the reminder. We will be sending out a survey just to help us with our programming. If you have any questions, or if you have any ideas for programs for AIA or for the Miami Center for Architecture and Design, we really welcome them. So look for that in an email after this, probably this evening or first thing tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and as Colleen said, it's just really important for us to get feedback from you of what you're looking for, so that our programming can be pertinent to what your needs are. So thank you very much for attending, and back to Colleen.
Thank you. Also, in the email that I'm going to send you with the link to the SurveyMonkey survey, we don't use or sell your information for anything else. So if you can complete the survey, it really is helpful for us, for our grants, and again, for your ideas for what kind of programming you want to see here. Also, there will be the link to the recording of this program. So please, when you see that, fill it out. It's helpful. Okay, right now let's get started with our program. I would like to introduce Stephanie Morales Casareggio, AIA, the founding principal of C-Space Architecture and Design. Stephanie?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to introduce our guests. We have David Merzel from Kaufman Rolson, and we also have Aaron Collinsworth. I'm going to give you a brief bio on each of them. David joined Kaufman Rolson and Company in 1995 and is a principal in the Entrepreneurial Services Department. He lends his expertise to many engagements involving entrepreneurs and high net worth individuals. His specialty is closely held businesses and individual and business taxation. So he's going to be helping us with all of the questions that we have related to taxes and small firms. And Erin Collinsworth, she has her own company, Collinsworth Insurance. Collinsworth Insurance is a commercial lines insurance agency providing access to insurance products and services for business. Her specialty is to help clients like me and you to navigate insurance and risk management issues facing them in their day-to-day operations, and to assist with planning for future needs as their businesses grow.
Can I butt in here for 2 seconds?
Absolutely.
If anyone has questions, we definitely want to get to your questions. Please put them in the chat feature that's at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll get to them either during the program, towards the end of the program, or if the conversation just goes on, we will send the questions to David and Aaron, and if they agree, they'll send us back whatever answers they have, and we'll get them to you. So sorry for interrupting, but I thought the question thing would be important.
Yeah, especially because there's just so many unique topics to cover that I think it would be great to be able to have more questions from more small firm owners and be able to get that addressed. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with Erin. This is probably the first step that we go through every time we decide to start our own firm. So Erin, does it matter how we organize, sole proprietor, incorporated, sub S, C Corp?
No, it does not from an insurance perspective. What I find is many times I get a phone call, but I'm an individual. That is not an issue. And should you start your practice as an individual, keep in mind personal liability follows the individual, and I tend to look at professional liability as the funding mechanism to support that exposure. You can incorporate, you can, add a named insured later, but if you want to cover the exposure, we absolutely can write it.
Okay, perfect. And David, when it comes to accounting, what are the most common oversights and issues for architects that are just starting out in the profession?
Sure. I think, from the very basics, the most common oversight is that, architects are very different than the way my brain is wired. So these are very creative, thoughtful people. And, I'm a math guy. So I think the most common misconception is that I'm going to be spending all my time creating. And you really need to understand that you need to be an accountant also. The common oversights are not having a budget, not having cash flow projections. Most of the time I see that the business owners or the architects in this case, they tend to just have a feel for their finances just based on cash, right? I have cash in the bank, things must be going well. And that's really, a very common oversight. Not utilizing project costing is very important. And, just really understanding that the accounting and the finance side of your business is a very, very important part of your business. And that's where the accountants and the bookkeepers and the resources come in to kind of help manage that aspect of the business.
And also, can software help? What do you recommend?
Yeah, of course, software is very, very powerful for all of us, but more so than any other aspect is accounting. So I've been doing this since 1995. Thanks for mentioning that, and we've really come a long way. There's some basics. It doesn't matter if you're very small or very large architectural firm. The power of, and I'm not a salesman for Intuit's QuickBooks, but the power of QuickBooks, especially these days, is just absolutely remarkable. First, it can help you project costs, can help you keep track of your finances and keep track of your cash, and it's very portable. So in this day and age, some folks are really, their offices everywhere and anywhere. And so it's very affordable, and there's a lot of powerful tools there. Even from a bookkeeping perspective, for the smaller firms that are just starting out, or even if you're just a one-person architect, you can actually outsource your bookkeeping to Intuit for just an unbelievable low price. Better than any CPA firm could offer, and then you partner up with your CPA firm. There's plenty of project costing software out there, and we will be distributing out a closing slide that has links to some of the most popular software for project costing. What's project costing? Well, it's very important that you keep track of what you're spending on each one of these jobs for clients, and that includes allocating overhead and other costs that aren't directly related to the project. And if you're just winging it and you're quoting fees and you have cash in the bank, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing well, nor does it help you plan for income taxes.
Yeah, I completely understand. And what would you recommend for a small firm that's just starting out? Do you think that that they should have a bookkeeper on board from the very beginning? Or do you think that's something that
Mhm.
starts once you get your first employee?
I think that that's an excellent question. You know, what I tend to recommend to new folks starting out, I know we have an array of different levels of experience that have joined us on this meeting, but I think it's important that if you're starting out, that you have an understanding of your bookkeeping, and whether that's, I know you don't want to take a few background courses or partner up with a CPA. We also teach and mentor. And the reason for that is that if it's just a simple handoff from day one, you really don't know how you're doing. You're relying on somebody else. I think it's important that you get your feet wet, you understand the ins and outs of what your expenses are. And then, time is of the essence. You wear many hats with a small business. You're selling, you're drafting, you're doing all kinds of things. Once you get to sort of critical mass, then I think you can outsource to a per diem or part-time bookkeeper, or use a service, or even use a small CPA firm. But I think you need to understand it and get your hands wrapped around it.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's something that we've actually applied in our practice too.
Good.
It was very DIY at first, and now we've come to a point where we've gotten extra help, and it's made a world of a difference. And it's helped us focus more on
If
our
I could
work.
just backtrack to
Mhm.
something Erin said that was very important about the structuring of a firm, and I agree with everything. You could start off slow by forming a single person LLC, which is similar to a sole proprietorship, and it becomes very flexible because you can very easily convert that once you get to a certain level. And what do I mean by certain level? Well, if you create something too complex initially, let's say you form a corporation and your income level is 200,000 or less or so, you're going to incur a lot of administrative costs, accountant to prepare the taxes, a payroll service to take reasonable compensation. And so at levels below that, as you're starting out, you start out with an LLC. You can then convert very easily to a multi-member, a partnership, if you join up with someone, or even an S corporation. So, and I think Erin, does the insurance work for all of those entity structures?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the easy part. And it goes back to some of what you were saying with the job cost software. I think choosing the software and how you set up QuickBooks, knowing how the information needs to be used moving forward, is helpful. Some of the issues we had discussed were reimbursables. That can be meals, travel. If you're doing interiors and purchasing the furniture and fixtures, that's a reimbursable cost and something you want to be able to pull out of your revenue. Subconsultant cost if you're hiring them. If a project is abandoned, to be able to go back and find the fees associated with that specific project rather than the client. There's quite a bit. I think when you're talking to your CPA and your insurance agent, we can guide you very well when you're starting up. And like in my case, I can't tell you how many times I'll say, I can get you so far. Now that has become a legal question. You need legal advice, and you really need to talk to your CPA and find out how it impacts you from a tax perspective.
Okay. And now that we're on the issue of cash, my accountant has discussed cash versus accrual. Does that impact my insurance?
No, but be consistent. Don't switch back and forth, because it's really how you're recognizing your revenues and your expenses. I believe David would agree. And you don't want to you want to be on the same page with your CPA or your bookkeeping and the insurance. You don't want to double report your revenue. There's no reason to pay for it twice.
That's right. And one of the benefits of being a professional service company is that you have the ability to be on a cash method versus accrual. Let me just explain the basics. Cash method is just that. You recognize revenue when you collect it, and you capture an expense or an outflow when it's paid, which makes a lot of sense. On an accrual basis, you're recognizing your revenue when you bill it. So when you send out an invoice and let's say you send out an invoice in December and you don't collect it until January, that's still part of your revenue. So generally in a professional service environment where you don't have inventory and you don't have things of that nature, a cash method of accounting is very helpful. There are some extreme situations where your accounts payable, which is your unpaid bills, those exceed your accounts receivable. It's unusual. In that case, you may want to consider that, but I highly recommend taking advantage of cash method of accounting especially for an architectural firm.
Okay, would there be any benefit doing it with accrual?
The benefit of accrual is that you can deduct expenses that have not been paid yet but have been incurred. So, for example, I purchase something and take title to it, but I haven't paid for it because there's 90-day terms. You're still allowed to deduct that. Now that sounds wonderful. Why wouldn't I not want to do that? Because if you're on an accrual where you can deduct and record your unpaid bills, you're also required to record and include in income your uncollected accounts receivable. So you generally want to measure the two. And it's difficult to switch method. It's easy to go from cash to accrual, but it's challenging to have a change of accounting method to go the other way. So I would think unless you have a ton of unpaid bills, cash method is going to be the way to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And Erin, I have a question for you. My accountant is asking on job cost tracking. What does the insurance company need to know?
We kind of touched on that in that last question.
Mhm.
You want to be able to break out your reimbursable cost. And it's in the application, it's going to be collected in revenue, as will sub-consultant cost. There's a few apps that will absolutely bypass sub-consultant cost and collect it later as a percentage of revenue. But almost every question in the application comes back to percentage of gross revenue. So whether it be client type, project type, is sub-consultant costs, and I'm repeating there, looking at my notes, that's really what you want to be able to know. And on project types, and I think we'll touch on that in a bit, it is important to be able to break it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll add
And-
this, your services. That's another big one. You need to know what you're doing on the project. Is it schematic? Is it a conceptual? Are you doing design with construction observation? Those are elements that we definitely want to know, and it comes back in impacts rating.
Yeah, and that was actually tied to the next question that I was going to ask you. What impacts our premiums? Is it tied to the type of work that we do?
Absolutely, it is multifaceted. The first question you're going to be asked generally in any application is, what is your discipline? And again, by percentage of revenue. I have some architects that are 100% architecture. I'll get some interior. I have some that self-perform the legally allowed percentages of engineering work. And that'll be collected. Architecture is one of the most highly rated disciplines in the market. And I know Elizabeth has got a question out there and we can pick up on it. That doesn't mean your policy is the most expensive, but typically speaking, architects hire the sub-consultant. So as a prime, you carry quite a bit of the liability for the project and the rating can reflect it. So your rating factor is going to be discipline. It's going gross revenues. Typically speaking, your revenues are averaged. Anybody who works with our agency, you know, we've been tweaking our cover emails. And what you'll see is when we talk about projected revenues, be conservative. There are some carriers that will charge you based on projected, some that don't. Some of it simply depends what quarter of the calendar year we're in. So you want to be conservative there. Project types, needless to say, residential condo, luxury high-rise residential condo is going to kill you. And in fact, there's been some discussions that if you're going to do condo, you really want to specialize in it. You're almost better off having it as a large percentage of revenue than just a dabble. But your project types will impact. And we have a handful of carriers, not even a handful, but a couple of carriers that will make a distinction between your condo work for an individual unit owner versus condo work for the developer or directly for the association. And when you're dealing with that project type in particular, that's important to know, because we're going to be limited on the carriers that can write an architect performing condo and make that distinction that your work is for the individual unit owner. And it will impact rate in a positive way. So job cost tracking, all of this, what impacts my rating, it all interrelates.
And I actually have a question on that. It comes up a lot in small firms. You know, we take on smaller projects. So especially when you do a lot of residential, you do end up doing a lot of remodels for individual condo unit owners. So would it be the same insurance to have for that, or would it be different?
No, you're working with the same insurance. The question becomes what the insurance carrier's underwriting guidelines are. And most of them don't have what I presume is the actuarial data coming out of their claims history to make the distinction of where the claim, who the client was, what the services were. They're just going to know we paid $500,000 for a claim that involved a condo project and it was an architect. They won't be able to break it down that the services were done for the developer or the services were done for the association. Beasley, as an example, is one of my few that has absolutely no issue with interior condo. And it fluctuates, but they even, and again, we'll be getting to this, but even with the small firms, they make that distinction, and it is very much in favor of the small practice.
Great, that's good to know. And also, I have a question for both of you, actually. And it's, what are the most common business structures for architects, and what are the benefits and constraints of each?
Sure, Erin, it's okay if I start. You know, so you know, it really takes some consulting to understand the architectural firm itself. If you're a single person, if you have partners, you know what your plans are for the future. But you know, I think we touched on the tax structures, which is really, you know, to me, the most important. And so again, very powerful using the LLC model. It does help with some liability protection. I'm not an attorney, but it's also very, very, very flexible. The S corporations work well, even better if it's just one person, because with an S corporation, if you have another stockholder or partner, distributions other than payroll need to be pro rata to ownership, which is often overlooked. So if I have an S corporation and I take in $500,000 and I have one partner and it's 60-40 split, after we take our salaries, the remaining distributions need to be pro rata 60-40. That's different than an LLC treated as a partnership, where you can write into your partnership agreement the fact that one person may have brought more to the table, and you can have disproportionate. But again, I think if you're starting out, certainly consult with your insurance person. Hopefully that's Erin, and your attorney about liability protection. But from a tax perspective, you're just starting out. We like to see a single member LLC, and then sort of as your business grows, we then sort of move it up from there to a little bit more of a complex structure.
Okay. And Erin, are there any practices that small firm owners should consider from day one?
Risk management. The majority of the insurance carriers provide complimentary contract review for insurability. Some are better than others. And Stephanie, and Elizabeth knows, we've had this conversation. Depending on your needs, I'll guide you, combination of coverage, pricing, in the benefits that you'll receive from the carrier. But for those, contract review is huge. And if you can use it as a learning tool, it's a great way to get your feet off the ground. Other than maybe the occasional law class, I don't think any of us have, none of us are attorneys. And the interesting thing with insurance is, my joke, and I say this several times a week, is I'm not an attorney, I only play one at work every day. And it's knowing my it's knowing my limitations when I'm crossing the line from this is insurance advice to legal advice, and you really need to speak to an attorney. But insurance in the law overlap all the time. And what you'll find is through a contract, you can assume far more liability than you have insurance coverage for. And I don't think that's the intent. And getting a good contract review, learning to negotiate with your client. Client selection tools. AIA Trust has a fantastic one for a go, no-go. RLI, one of my insurance carriers, uses it. I think Berkeley uses it. We worked with a very large engineering firm 15, 20 years ago who had a very short form client selection. I have an engineer who was bidding on a infrastructure transportation project up in the Central Florida area. And I had just read an article that the state, it was a government agency, and the state was forcing one of these agencies to assume responsibility and liabilities for a related entity, and there was no cash flow for it. Those are little things. Yeah, it's a business perspective. If you're dealing with a government agency, how litigious are they? What does your gut feeling tell you? Client selection, the go, no-go is incredibly important. And I think if you were just starting with those principles, contract review for contract negotiation and client selection, you're starting in a very good position.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that the go, no go, that's a great thing to have.
Well, and think about it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
I was just saying, I'm just, we're mentioning the importance of a CPA, a great insurance person, and an attorney. I think also a very important relationship is choosing your bank wisely. Your bank is your partner, even when you're small or you're big or you're large, and it plays a vital role and it fits in. So what you're trying to do here is, as you build your empire, is have advisors that you have a relationship with, that you can reach out to your insurance person, to your CPA, to an attorney that's experienced. But the bank is important because if you take on a larger project and you want to have a line of credit in place before you need it, don't use it frivolously. But lining up all of those professional resources for yourself, I assure you, when the issues come up, they're generally unexpected.
I'd like to throw this out. Yeah, and I'd like to throw this back out to David, and it goes with your question about practices from the beginning. David, how about the firms monitoring and collecting outstanding fees?
Yes, very, very important. So, you know, you have, it depends on the type of area that you're practicing in. So, and I'll give you a few examples, but very important to stay ahead of your clients. So, you know, you want to bill in installments. You want to constantly stay ahead as long as your contract permits that. And, you know, with residential, you know, we're all here in South Florida. This is unprecedented time to be practicing as an architect. You know, not only do we live in a great climate, but, you know, everyone else around the country has now decided to move here. And, you know, commercial is still hot if it's, but the residential is really taking off. So, you know, that's kind of what I do. I'd like to, I don't mean to change the top, but I want to sort of work into some of the, you know, the tax credits that I think are very specific. I don't know if this is a good time for that. Steph?
Yes, that was actually one of my next questions. So
Yeah,
that works out.
it kind of goes hand in hand with some of these, you know, things that are very specific for architects. So there's many, but two that are very, very important that are often overlooked, especially sometimes when you're small and budget's tight and you kind of take on maybe preparing your own tax return, whether that's incorporated inside of your personal return or whether that's a business return that you're filing. And this is called the Qualified Business Income Deduction. We call it QBI. And this has been around in one form or another, but it's most professional service firms, like lawyers, like attorney, like accountants, like physicians, there's an income limitation. But however, for architects, this deduction is called Qualified Business Income Deduction, and effectively with some hurdles and limitations, you as an architect, you can claim the deduction and effectively exclude up to 20% of your net income. I know that sounds shocking, but it's widely used. It's set to sunset in 2025. If anyone's been practicing, you know, prior to the Tax Cuts and Job Act, when Trump came in, there was something similar. It was called the Domestic Production Activities Deduction, which was always available to architects, and it was the same 20%. So we believe that when that went away and the new tax code came in, it really was unfair to the architects because that was something that was always been there and very important. So please, there's some very careful planning there. It does have some interaction with wages and, you know, tangible property that you have if your income is over a certain level. So these we call them guardrails. Once your income is over a certain level, whether you're married or single, there's limitations, meaning it can't exceed 50% of wages that you're paying to your employees. There's another often overlooked tax credit for architects called the Research and Development Credit. Now, typically when you think of R&D, research and development, you think of software, you think of a biotech company, and you say, well, what am I researching? What am I developing? But, you know, if you have a unique plan that you're involved with as an architect, or a unique project, you know, for example, you know, your design impacts, you have an environmental issue, and your design is unique and it redirects parking or traffic or incorporates the structure into a certain type of landscape. So anything that's sort of unique to your design project that's not sort of just, you know, cookie cutter should be looked at. We Kaufman Rawson, we have a specialty in R&D. We have a whole group of folks that just do this all the time. We've done some very interesting projects where our clients have said, there's no way I'm eligible for an R&D credit. And, you know, this is a combination of a CPA, but an engineer. So it's a CPA that can read blueprints, that understands drawings, that understands materials that are being used, and it's really fantastic. Probably the most overlooked credit with the QBI that I see overlooked for architects. So hopefully, Stephanie, you're claiming that somewhere, I hope. We'll have to,
I'm writing that right now as we
Yeah.
speak.
yeah. I mean,
Taking
people,
notes.
we're all human. We tend to rely, if you don't do this for a living, we tend to rely on our software, right? Oh yeah, the software will catch that, or whatever it is, TurboTax, or even experienced accountant miss it all the time. These are completely legitimate, IRS, revenue rulings on this. So I highly encourage you to be thinking or asking those questions to your professionals. Some of the other things that would impact taxes that often overlooked, sometimes due to cash flow, sometimes just too busy, right? You're an architect, you're networking, you're doing the work, you're the accountant, you're the HR person, you have all these things going on, and retirement planning at any age is absolutely incredible. There's many tax incentives to put in retirement plans. That could be something as simple as a SEP, an SEP, a self-employed pension, which works really well for a one-person LLC or an S corp or any type. And it's driven off of your profits, and there's a cap, but you could put away up to $57,000 in a self-employed pension. Very little administration. You don't need you don't need an expensive third-party administrator. And then from there, 401ks with if you have multi-members or other employees, 401ks with profit sharing, and matching components. And at first, business owners shy away from the word profit sharing. They say, what do you mean? I have to give money to my employees? I don't want to do that. But what happens here is that with the 401k, with a profit sharing component, the ability for you to get more into your plan and the tax savings on that, that's the cost benefit that you look at. So if that would outweigh the matching component to your employees, and it's also a very good incentive. And lastly, there are some very exotic type of plans, but these involve some very serious profitable years, like a cash balance plan, where you can based upon your age, you can we've seen folks being able to deduct $250,000 a year. They're very complex, so I don't want to get too far ahead. But these are the things why you need a professional. Whether that's me or your neighbor who's the CPA. I would never try to draft any sort of plans myself. I wouldn't know where to begin. So be thinking about these very special incentives for architects and professional service folks.
That was very helpful. Thank you. And I'll make sure to take advantage of those deductions and credits.
Sure.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back now to the topic of insurance, Erin. So small firms can get insurance, but when would be the right time for a small firm owner to get insurance?
That's really an individual decision. I think everybody's risk tolerance varies. I talk to people who've been in the business for 30, 40 years and they're just getting insurance today. I talk to people who walked out of their attorney's office or CPA's office and said, okay, they told me the next thing I need to do is procure professional liability insurance. So it varies by the individual. If you're interested in insurance, but you really just don't know the specific timing, you really want to secure the coverage prior to executing your first contract. So if you want to be insured for professional liability from the get-go, start start the submission process, start the conversation, and you'd want to finalize it prior to executing the first contract. And there are some real technicalities that get into this, the type of policy form being claims, claims made, all of these things that we can toss around. But that's really, the detail of it's really a conversation for another time from a timing perspective prior to the first contract.
And what type insurance would a small firm owner need?
Typically speaking, again, it's tolerance for risk, but the biggest I would recommend is professional liability. It insures your professional services. If you are hiring sub-consultants, you are vicariously liable for their acts, their inadequate limits, their inadequate coverage. So just relying on your mechanical or structural sub to be insured, I would suggest is not adequate. Again, if this is one of your concerns. South Florida, in particular, well, general liability insurance really does not do much for a professional. General liability, if you want to think about it in the most basic terms, it slips and falls. So when you have a rented office space, the landlord may require you to provide general liability. And it's inexpensive. And if it is something you want to pursue, what I would encourage you to do so, because what we can very inexpensively endorse to that policy is what we refer to as hired and non-owned auto liability. And this does not cover your vehicle. This does not cover you if you're in an accident going to the theater with your spouse. What it does do is if you're involved in, if an officer or employee is involved in an at-fault accident that involves serious injuries or serious damages, it's an excess. It protects the business and it protects the officer and the employee in their role as such for the business. And it's excess liability for the use of the personally owned insurance. I have 4 or 5 claims. In fact, we were coming up from Isla Morada this weekend and I saw a Morgan & Morgan billboard saying size matters. And they're not kidding, because I have 3-4 demands that have crossed my desk for auto claims, excess $1 million. And it's not necessarily even tied to the injuries. So, those are the basics starting out. Florida statute does not require workers' compensation until you exceed 4 or more employees, including officers. Officers can exempt themselves. And again, this is one of those little quirks in Florida, in the statute. You may not be required to carry workers' comp, but neither are you given immunity. So if you have employees or even yourself you're involved in construction observation, you're going to project sites, maybe something you want to consider.
And what are the standard limits?
There really are no standard limits. You'll find your contract drives that. If you're looking at municipal work for professional liability, you're typically seeing $1 million. If you're starting out, the client's executing your agreement and you're governing the required limits, the lowest, and I mean bottom lowest, is probably $250,000. I participated, was listening to a panel discussion about 2 years ago now, and it was claim adjusters. And one of the individuals mentioned, when a claim is reported, so he works for the insurance carrier, anything less than 250, there's not really anything he can do with it. 250, maybe, but you hit 500,000 minimum limits, and he at least can structure something that will include defense and probably have some money left over for damages. And we're not talking catastrophic losses here. We're talking the pain in the neck claims that come, that come through dissatisfied client. And probably in most of those, I would say using a client selection or go, no go after the fact, you're going to say, I knew I didn't want that client for a great number of them. And then the general liability, that does have a standard limit. It's 1 million, 2 million. Don't let that scare you away. Minimum premiums are probably under $500 annual premium.
That's good to know. And how are the premiums paid?
Premiums can be paid, generally speaking, most insurance carriers, it's pay in full. It's generally collected by the insurance agent, although I'm finding, particularly after COVID, it was one of the interesting observations and experiences. A lot of the carriers really stepped up to the plate, and the grace periods they were providing on collection of premiums was just absolutely phenomenal. It was not what I would have expected. In those circumstances, I'm starting to shift some of my clients to what we call direct bill. Direct bill generally provides options to pay on installments directly to the carrier. And if we don't have either option, we can also offer financing. And when I look at a finance agreement, the interest rate is usually pretty horrendous. Definitely not what you're seeing when you're looking at, a long-term interest rate for mortgages. It's definitely a higher rate, and it's more than you're going to make on a CD. But the actual dollar impact is pretty minimal. So if you have the preference for cash flow, a finance agreement is the way to go.
Good to know. And since we are on the topic of paying for insurance, I know it can add up. And David, I wanted to ask you, can this serve as a tax deduction or expenses on insurance?
Excellent question. So even if you're certainly the insurance is tax deductible, other than certain forms of life insurance or disability policies for the owners, and there's a good reason for that. But insurance, of course, is an operating expense. And even if you're financing it, which is it's important if it's expensive, and you're on the cash method, you can deduct that. So you'll just record your liability, for the financing, but you'll get to not only expense the premiums, but you'll get to expense any insurance or fees that are baked into the financing arrangement. And it's not an insurance topic, but it's the same thing with your fixed assets and equipment. Although you're on a cash method, if you finance it, think of a car. Really not a great example, but you buy a car, you finance it, you're still allowed a deduction with limitations, even though you haven't really had the cash outlay. So even with the financing, that would give rise to a tax deduction.
Yeah. And it's great to have your insurance too, because you may think you don't need it, but when it comes around, it's
I'm an
totally
insurance.
worth
Erin didn't pay me to say this. I am an insurance junkie because I really am. I just it's so critical in just every single business, whether you're an architect or you have a manufacturing facility. It's just it's there when you need it, and it's in most cases it's required, especially for the architects and some of the projects that are going on to mitigate risk.
Yeah, I mean, even as an architect, it's just given me a lot of peace of mind to have an understanding of what projects I can take on and not take on because of my insurance. So I've found insurance to be very helpful for us as a company.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And with all of us being professionals speaking to professionals, there's a mechanism here for the professional liability, particularly for architects and engineers, that I don't have as an insurance agent. And I'm guessing Kaufman Roston doesn't have as a CPA. And in many ways, the architects and engineers professional liability policy is one of the softest insurance products available. They, typically speaking, the adjusters and the underwriters are seeking to find coverage rather than find exclusions. But one of the biggest benefits is you have what we call circumstance reporting and pre-claims assistance. In the pre-claims assistance, I've had architects and engineers tell me it's every project every day. But it's that time when your gut just tells you the project is going south. There's rumblings, let's say the contractor's having cost overruns, there's delays. You're getting the sense that you're in the crosshairs. It's when you pick up the phone, you call me and you say, hey, I've got this issue. We're either going to say, go to the next meeting, come back and let us know how it goes. Did it resolve? Or yeah, don't even go to that meeting without talking to your insurance carrier. And what you will end up typically receiving is free legal advice. They will generally assign an attorney to assist you. And I can tell you as an insurance agent, I don't have the benefit of that. It is truly one of the most powerful pieces of the insurance puzzle.
Perfect. And I see that we have a few minutes left. So I had a question for David. What do you see as having the biggest impact on the profession for the future?
Thank you. That's a great question. There's some non-tax and accounting issues, but I mean, what I'm seeing with the architectural firms right now is there's a shortage of labor. Okay, that I think that will continue. Obviously, where we are here in South Florida, land shortage is becoming an issue, and so there's less and less projects. I think more firms are focusing in on climate change issues. That's an important part of every design, especially in Miami. And there's a shortage of materials, right? So although you're an architect, this sort of impacts your entire profession, and I really kind of see that continuing in our market here in South Florida, just because it's so popular, and but the other biggest impact finally is tax reform. So we know it's coming. We're hopefully towards the end of a pandemic. We hope, as my managing partner said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We just don't know if it's a locomotive. So we'll continue to be hopeful, but all the spending that's going on, and which is, in my opinion, been very good to prop up our economy. Tax reform is coming. So I think that's a big change that's going to impact us all, every industry. So, the takeaway there is, and it kind of ties all the accounting and the tax planning together, is that stay ahead of your, whether you have a bookkeeper internally or you outsource your accounting. It's very important to know where you stand so you can plan. There's nothing worse than you had a great year, you're busy as heck, and now you get to the end of the year and you owe this big chunk of tax. It's not always the amount that has you upset, it's the surprise. And the best way to do that is simply stay ahead. And if you have a good financial control over your business in that regard, then you can plan forward with tax reform coming. So it may be retroactive to January 1 of 21. We'll see. We personally think will not be popular to raise taxes as we're making our way through this once in a generation experience. But it's coming. So those are really for our market, those are the biggest things I see as impactful, especially for architects.
Great, thank you. And I have one more question left for both of you, and it's, what are the takeaways or recommendations for architects starting out in the profession?
Well, I'm just going to summarize what I've been saying all along. It's kind of a repeat of my last answer, but I see it all the time. I see just focused in on architecture, and who wants to think about their accountant, right? I do, my wife does, but it's really important. You have to make it as equally important to your networking, your actual architectural work, which probably takes up all of your time, and just make it a priority, make it part of your monthly routine to understand what's driving your business, what's your cash flow. The old rule of thumb still stays in place, is that you should be thinking 13 weeks out at least at a time, right? Which is a quarter of the year. You should know where your cash is coming from, not just with this projects that has you and your firm, running around trying to get it done. You need to forward think, and that's where all the accounting and the tax comes in. So the takeaway is to partner up with someone that you trust.
Great advice. Thank you.
I think I would mirror very much what David just said. And I say that as a business owner myself. I think for an architect and engineer, one of the biggest elements is understanding your appetite for risk, trusting your instincts, and learning to do that from the get-go, receiving sound financial advice, watching your like as David is saying, watching your cash flow. A client with late pay isn't necessarily a client without an issue. The client may be late pay because they're dissatisfied with your services but haven't told you yet. It's often a claim waiting to happen. So I know it just really comes down to knowing the business. As great as it is to be an architect, you love the creativeness of your design. My happiest clients are the ones who can marry the architecture with the business side, in whether you're sharing those responsibilities with the partner, or you're handling everything yourself and wearing many hats. But if you're expecting it just to be fun every day, it's not going to be, and we're going to get those phone calls that say, this just isn't fun anymore. So I think it's having a realistic expectation. And when you go into business for yourself and you're wearing many hats, it's going to have its challenges, expect them, but it also has some incredible rewards.
Thank you. And thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that all of our guests have learned a lot as well. We do have 2 more questions coming in from our participants. And the first one is from Elizabeth Camargo. One of the myths small owners believe is that professional liability insurance is very expensive and above their financial availability. Can you go over the types and costs of insurances available for small firms? I know we went over that lightly.
We went over that lightly or on the types, but professional liability insurance is very affordable. What you will find as a new firm in particular are your project types. And this will probably tie into that second question regarding condos as a project type. If you're working on condos and your services are not being provided to the unit owner, you're going to be rated with the big boys. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you can find minimum premiums of $1,800 for $1 million in limits. But and as you grow, as you move forward, the cost will increase. Expect that. Definitely not static. And the insurance industry tends to be pretty cyclical. So you'll see changes, but as a small firm starting out, you definitely have options. You have options with someone like me or other agents who specialize in architects and engineers. Don't shy away any more than you would go to a CPA or an attorney who doesn't understand your business. Insurance is not just a commodity. You want to talk to somebody who understands your business as well.
Perfect. And we have one more question from Eneida Piñon. Does insurance for condos refer only to condo units, or does it include accessory structures like condo community centers and gyms?
Condos are condos are condos. The carve out is the unit owner, and it's really pretty specific. It's just the data. It's how they. It's just the data on how they collect the claims information, and at that level, what's driving claims are the client owner. When you do work for a developer on particularly luxury high rise, there's going to be a turnover report that generally generates claims that come through. On smaller projects, not as likely, but you're still going to be rated as a condo. So just know the carve out is unit owner.
Great, thank you. So I think that concludes our town hall. Thank you so much for joining us. It was very helpful. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, hopefully for another one in the near future.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Stephanie and Aaron
Thank
and
you.
David. This was fascinating. And everyone who's on the Zoom call, please look for the email. It'll come this evening or first thing tomorrow morning. And the survey link, it's really important if you can, just take a second. It's really short and just let us know how we did. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.